Have you ever looked over your shoulder and just known you were being watched? That's what Daniel Price felt at a rest stop on Interstate 80 in Nebraska. As he sat in his car, too tired to drive on, a man emerged from the shadows. The man's stillness and the way he lingered by Daniel's window made it clear his question wasn't harmless. In that moment, the rest stop stopped feeling like a place to catch your breath and started feeling like a trap. America's highways can seem like endless stretches of routine, but stories like Daniel's remind us how quickly a familiar road can turn hostile. Sometimes the most dangerous thing out there isn't the road itself. It's the person waiting in the dark, ready to take advantage of a moment's vulnerability. And as Daniel would learn, he wasn't alone in facing the unexpected on a quiet drive. Mark Sullivan had been driving for hours. The stretch of I-40 in New Mexico ahead of him was a straight line through the dark, the kind of road that could make you feel like you were the last person left in the world. The only thing breaking up the emptiness was the steady hum of his little car and the faint shimmer of stars above the desert. He'd passed a few gas stations and truck stops, but for the most part, it was just him and the highway, so when he saw someone waving by the side of the road, it caught him off guard. The figure was a woman, standing next to a car with one headlight out. She looked small against the night, her arms moving in wide arcs to flag him down. As Mark slowed, he noticed the car's windshield was cracked and there was a dent on the hood. He hesitated, thinking about all the warnings he'd heard about stopping for strangers, but something about the scene made him pull over anyway. He kept his hands tight on the wheel as the woman came up to his window. When he rolled it down just enough to hear her, he saw blood on her temple, just a trickle, but enough to make her story believable. She said she'd swerved to avoid someone in the road and lost control. Her words tumbled out in a rush, and Mark found himself asking if the person she'd seen was still nearby. She shook her head, but her eyes kept darting past him into the darkness. Mark tried to steady himself. He knew the stories. People lured out of their cars by someone in distress, only to be ambushed. Still, he felt the pull to help. He glanced around, searching for movement, and that's when he noticed something that didn't fit. Off to the side, further down the shoulder, two shapes sat almost invisible against the night. He couldn't make out the details at first, just the outline of vehicles, low and heavy. The air felt different, as if the night itself was closing in. A low rumble reached him, the sound of engines turning over. The silhouettes began to shift, edging forward with a slow, deliberate crawl. Mark's heart kicked up. He looked back at the woman who had stepped away from his window. Her posture changed, shoulders tensed, as if she was waiting for something to happen. Mark realized he was boxed in, his car on the shoulder, the woman's car in front, and now these two vehicles creeping closer. He watched as the dark shapes drew nearer, their forms resolving into two SUVs. Their headlights stayed off, but he could see the faint glint of chrome and the outline of grills. One SUV eased up alongside his driver's side, close enough that he could see the driver's face through a half-lowered window, a wide grin that didn't reach the eyes. The other SUV moved into position ahead, blocking any path forward. The way they moved wasn't random. It was practiced, like they'd done this before. Mark's mind raced. He hadn't rolled his window up yet, and the woman said something muffled, but it was drowned out by the sudden roar of the nearest SUV's engine. The horn blared, two sharp bursts that rattled through his chest. For a second, he froze, every instinct telling him to get out, but not knowing how. He reached across to the passenger door and locked it, then forced himself to look away from the faces outside. He gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the rough plastic dig into his palms. He floored the gas, but his tires spun against the loose gravel at first. The SUVs inched even closer, trying to box him in completely. Mark saw a narrow gap between the front SUV and the edge of the road, barely wide enough for his car. He didn't think, just acted, wrenching the wheel and shooting through the space. His car scraped against the rumble strips, the tires kicking up dust and rocks. For a moment, he thought he'd lose control. But then he was free, the open highway stretching out in front of him. In his rearview mirror, the SUVs didn't follow. Their headlights flicked on, but they stayed put, taillights glowing red as he put distance between them. Mark's hands shook on the wheel. Every few seconds he checked his mirrors, half expecting to see them speeding up behind him. The adrenaline didn't fade. He scanned every car he passed, searching for familiar shapes, wondering if he'd really gotten away or if this was just the first round. He didn't slow down until he saw the blue and red flash of a state trooper's patrol car parked at a bend a few exits down. The sight of law enforcement felt like a line drawn between danger and safety. Mark pulled over nearby, letting himself breathe for the first time in miles. He sat there, engine running, replaying the scene over and over. He'd heard about these kinds of setups before, decoys on the side of the road, accomplices waiting nearby, the whole thing designed to catch someone off guard. It was only later that he learned there had been multiple reports of box-in robberies along that stretch of I-40, all in places where help was far away, and the night seemed endless. The experience changed him. He kept thinking about how easily it could have gone the other way. One decision, to stop for someone who looked like they needed help, almost cost him everything. Now, whenever he drives past cars stranded on lonely stretches, he feels the weight of that night. He remembers the woman's face, the silent approach of the SUVs, the way the world seemed to narrow down to a single, desperate choice. Mark's story isn't unique. Isolated highways and open spaces create opportunities for people willing to use fear and confusion as weapons. The sense of being cut off from help, the pressure to make a split-second decision, these are the things that turn an ordinary drive into something much more dangerous. Sometimes all it takes is a moment's hesitation or a stranger's plea to set everything in motion. And while Mark's encounter happened under the clear desert sky, not every threat comes out of the darkness. Sometimes the environment itself can become part of the trap. A thick fog, a sudden downpour, anything that limits what you can see and how fast you can react. For some drivers, it's not just the people on the road they have to worry about, but the conditions around them too. Amanda Hayes first noticed the fog as she crossed the outskirts of Stockton, heading south on Highway 99. It wasn't the kind that drifted in gently and settled over the fields. This was a dense, heavy wall that swallowed the road, headlights, and even the familiar shape of her own hands on the steering wheel. She kept her speed low, eyes straining to catch the faintest outline of anything beyond the glass. Even with the radio turned down, the silence outside pressed in, thick and unnatural. She'd driven this stretch plenty of times, but tonight, the world beyond her windshield felt unfamiliar. Landmarks she usually relied on, billboards, the old grain silo, the blinking light from the feed store, had vanished. The fog seemed to muffle not just sound but time, too. It was easy to lose track of how long she'd been alone on the road. She tried to focus on the white line at the edge of the pavement, but even that faded in and out, leaving her disoriented and uneasy. Amanda had read about how fog could be more than just a weather hazard. It could be used as psychological warfare, turning a simple drive into a test of nerves, making drivers question what they saw and what they missed. She didn't expect to find out firsthand how true that could be. A sudden flash of red broke the monotony. Up ahead, a pair of taillights glowed faintly through the mist, growing brighter as she approached. She eased off the gas, heart thumping a little harder. The car was stopped at an odd angle on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. Amanda slowed to a crawl and came to a stop just a few feet behind it, her own headlights barely illuminating the battered old sedan. The driver's door hung open. She glanced at her phone for a signal. Nothing. The isolation settled over her in a way that felt different from before. A man stepped out from the fog and waved, moving toward her with one hand raised. He looked anxious but not threatening, and she kept her window up, watching him approach. When he reached her door, she cracked the window just enough to hear. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice thin and edged with nerves. "My car died. I think it's the battery. Could you help me with a jump?" Amanda kept her hands on the wheel. She looked past him, back toward the open door of his car, and noticed movement in the fog. Another person emerged, barely more than a shadow, circling slowly behind the stalled car. Amanda's stomach dropped. She didn't know how many people were out there, or what their intentions were, but the sense of being boxed in was immediate. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Is that someone else with you?" she asked, nodding toward the second figure. The man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "Yeah, that's my buddy. He's just trying to get a signal. No luck out here." Amanda's instincts screamed at her to get out, but she forced herself to stay calm. The fog pressed in, making it impossible to see anything beyond the two men and the broken-down car. She realized how easily the situation could be used as a setup, how the fog provided cover, hiding accomplices and muffling sound, making it almost impossible for anyone passing by to notice if something went wrong. "This isn't a good spot to stop," she said, voice clipped. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." She started to roll up her window, but the man shifted to block her view of the side mirror. She glanced at the second figure, now moving closer behind her car. Her heart hammered as she realized her exit was about to be cut off. Without waiting, Amanda shifted into drive and pressed the gas. Her tires spun a moment on the damp pavement before catching. She pulled out sharply, the beam of her headlights slicing through the fog as she accelerated away from the scene. Behind her, she heard voices shouting, 2, maybe more, but she didn't look back. The road ahead was a tunnel of gray, but she kept her foot steady until the taillights and the threat behind her disappeared. Amanda didn't slow down until she saw the lights of town ahead. She pulled into a grocery store parking lot, the lot empty but well lit, and sat with her hands trembling on the wheel. The encounter replayed in her mind. The way the man tried to keep her attention, the second person lurking in the fog, the sense of being trapped by more than just the weather. She wondered how many others had driven past that same spot, and whether anyone else had stopped. The next day, Amanda told a co-worker what happened. She started reading about similar incidents, how dense fog can be exploited to create cover for criminal activity, how breakdowns are sometimes staged, and how the sense of isolation and disorientation can make drivers easier targets. She learned that these tactics weren't new, and that the fog's ability to obscure vision and muffle sound made it an ideal tool for people looking to prey on vulnerable drivers. The psychological impact lingered. Amanda found herself avoiding Highway 99 at night, especially when the forecast called for fog. She replayed every detail, questioning whether she could have done anything differently, or if she'd just been lucky. The sense of vulnerability didn't fade quickly. Even weeks later, she'd tense up whenever she saw a car stopped on the shoulder, the memory of those shapes in the fog never far from her mind. Her experience made her more cautious, and she trusted her instincts in a way she hadn't before. She reminded herself that sometimes the threat isn't what you can see, but what's hidden by weather, by darkness, by a story that sounds just believable enough to make you pause. The fog had turned a routine drive into something Amanda would never forget. Not every encounter on the highway is as clear-cut as Amanda's, and not every threat comes out of the mist. Sometimes the danger waits in places meant for rest and safety, where the only warning is a feeling that something isn't right. For Daniel Price, that feeling came late at night, when exhaustion made him pull off I-80 and into a rest stop that seemed quiet, until he realized he wasn't as alone as he thought. The rest stop off I-80 in Nebraska looked unremarkable when Daniel Price pulled in late that night. Its concrete lot stretched out under a row of streetlights, but only one of them, near the building, flickered on and off. Daniel parked beneath that light, the uneven glow making his car feel both exposed and oddly protected. He didn't notice how empty the place was at first. The lot had a few scattered cars and a couple of semis parked at the far end, engines rumbling quietly in the background. The brick restroom building sat under the dim glow, vending machines humming just outside the doors. Daniel killed the engine and sat back, letting the silence settle. The fatigue from hours on the road made his head heavy. He checked his phone for messages, but there was nothing. The only sound came from the cooling engine and the distant insects. He stepped out to stretch his legs, the gravel crunching under his shoes. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of diesel and cut grass. He tried to shake off the stiffness in his shoulders and looked around, scanning the lot out of habit. That's when he saw the man. The figure stood at the edge of the light's reach, not moving, just watching. Daniel tried to tell himself it was nothing, just another traveler taking a break. But the man's stillness made something in Daniel's gut tighten. He kept his eyes on him as he walked toward the restroom, the sense of being watched never leaving. Inside, the restroom was cold and echoing. Daniel splashed water on his face, trying to clear the fog from his mind. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, telling himself he was just tired, that he was overreacting. But the feeling didn't fade. He dried his hands and pushed open the door, stepping back out into the pale light. The man was closer now, standing just a few yards away. He didn't look like a trucker or a family on a road trip. He wore a plain jacket, hands in his pockets, face half lit by the flickering bulb overhead. Daniel slowed his steps, weighing whether to say something or just keep moving. The man stepped forward and tapped on Daniel's window as he reached his car. "You got a cigarette?" he asked. His voice was casual, but the way he smiled didn't match the question. Daniel shook his head, muttering that he didn't smoke. The man didn't move away. He just stood there, his pale smile fixed in place. Daniel kept his keys ready, hand tightening around them. He opened his door, trying to keep his body between himself and the stranger. The man shifted his weight but didn't step back. Daniel got in quickly and locked the door. He looked up and saw the man standing just outside, staring through the glass. The next words came quiet, almost lost under the buzz of the light. "You sure you're alone out here?" The question hung in the air, making Daniel's skin prickle. He didn't answer. He started the car, the engine's noise loud in the empty lot. The man didn't flinch or move. He just watched. Daniel reversed out of the parking spot, his hands shaking on the wheel. As he pulled away, he caught one last look at the man, still standing in the same spot, watching the taillights disappear. The drive back onto the highway felt longer than it should have. Daniel's mind raced, replaying every detail. He realized how easily a routine stop could have turned into something dangerous. He kept checking his mirrors, half expecting headlights to follow. Reports show roughly 30% of rest areas have no security cameras. Daniel thought about that as he drove, feeling the weight of what almost happened. The rest stop, meant as a place to rest and regroup, had left him more anxious than before. He wondered how many others had found themselves in similar situations, tired and vulnerable, not realizing the risks until it was too late. Back home, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling. He started planning his trips differently, sticking to well-lit, busy stops whenever possible. He bought a portable charger for his phone and kept pepper spray in the glove compartment. The memory of that night stayed with him, a reminder to trust his instincts and never let fatigue cloud his judgment. The experience changed the way Daniel looked at rest stops. What seemed safe in daylight could feel exposed and unpredictable at night. The isolation, the lack of surveillance, and the presence of strangers with unknown intentions combined to make even a short break on the road a calculated risk. Daniel's story is a reminder that vigilance matters, especially in places designed for safety but left open to chance. For some drivers, the danger doesn't wait at a rest stop. Sometimes it finds you in motion, when the road itself becomes the setting for something you can't predict. Kevin Ramsey had never liked driving at night, especially in heavy rain, but he told himself it was just another stretch of I-29 in Missouri. The highway felt emptier than usual, the white lines barely visible beyond the sweep of his wipers. He kept his focus on the road, hands steady on the wheel, and tried not to let the storm outside get to him. When a pair of headlights appeared in his mirror, he barely registered it at first. Cars came and went, and sometimes people drove too close. It was late, and most drivers just wanted to get home, but the dark blue sedan behind him didn't pass. Instead, it hovered a little too close, its headlights filling his rear view. Kevin glanced at the clock, almost midnight. He signaled and moved into the right lane, expecting the sedan to go around. It didn't. It shifted lanes with him, closing the gap even more. Kevin felt a flicker of unease. He tried to rationalize it away, telling himself maybe the other driver was just nervous about the rain too. But every time he adjusted his speed or lane, the sedan matched him, never dropping back or pulling ahead. He tried to ignore it, but the pressure kept building. The sedan's headlights were so bright that the inside of his car glowed, making it impossible to forget about the presence behind him. Kevin slowed down, hoping the car would finally take the hint and pass, but it stayed glued to his bumper. He sped up, and it matched his pace. The rain made the world outside feel smaller and more claustrophobic, the sound of it against the roof mixing with the hum of his own anxiety. After several miles of this, Kevin's nerves started to fray. He turned on his blinker and changed lanes again. The sedan followed, moving in perfect sync. He tried letting his car drift a little toward the shoulder, hoping the driver would back off, but the sedan edged closer, forcing Kevin to hug the shoulder briefly. He could see the shape of the driver now, a shadow behind the wheel, face unreadable in the darkness. Kevin's chest tightened. He kept his eyes on the road, trying not to make eye contact in the mirror, but he could feel the stare from behind. Kevin knew about road rage. He'd read stories about drivers who escalated things for no reason, who took a minor annoyance as a personal insult. He tried to remember if he'd done anything to provoke it. He hadn't cut anyone off, hadn't braked suddenly, hadn't even lingered in the left lane. Still, the sedan stayed with him, close enough that he couldn't ignore it anymore. The road stretched out ahead, empty except for the two cars. Kevin thought about pulling over at the next exit, but he didn't want to stop somewhere isolated with the sedan right behind him. He glanced at his phone, but the signal was weak, and he didn't want to risk fumbling with it while driving. The rain kept falling, making the world outside look even more unfriendly. He tried to remember the advice he'd heard about aggressive drivers. Don't react. Don't make eye contact. Don't do anything that could be seen as a challenge. Kevin kept his movements slow and steady, hands tight on the wheel. He watched the sedan in his mirrors, waiting for any sign that it would finally back off. but it didn't. Instead, it inched even closer, headlights glaring. Then, without warning, the sedan jerked to the left, edging toward Kevin's lane. He felt his heart pound as he instinctively moved over, hugging the shoulder to avoid a collision. For a few seconds, the sedan hovered next to him, close enough that he could see the outline of the driver's head turning in his direction. Kevin kept his face forward, refusing to look. The sedan drifted back behind him, resuming its place just a few feet from his bumper. The tension in the car was thick. Kevin's mind raced through possibilities. Was this just a reckless driver? Or was it something more? He remembered stories of people being forced off the road, robbed, or worse. He didn't want to find out what the driver wanted. He scanned the road ahead for any sign of other cars, but it was just darkness and rain. Kevin's knuckles were white on the wheel. He tried slowing down again, but the sedan matched him, never letting the gap widen. He sped up and it did the same. The pattern repeated, mile after mile, until Kevin felt like he was trapped in a game he didn't understand. Eventually, the lights of a small town appeared in the distance. Kevin spotted a gas station just off the highway, its parking lot empty but well lit. He flicked on his turn signal and pulled off, heart pounding in his ears. The sedan followed at first, then kept going, disappearing into the night as Kevin pulled into the lot. He parked under the brightest light he could find and sat there, hands shaking, watching the rain streak down the windshield. He waited for a while, scanning the road for any sign of the sedan returning. When none came, he let himself breathe. The adrenaline lingered, but the danger seemed to have passed. Kevin knew he'd been lucky. He thought about how quickly a normal drive could turn into something threatening, and how little control he'd had over the situation. After that night, Kevin changed some of his habits. He started planning his routes more carefully, avoiding long stretches of empty highway at night when he could. He also bought a dash cam, mounting it to his windshield before his next trip. He'd read that dash cams could deter aggressive drivers, the knowledge that they're being recorded sometimes enough to make people think twice. For Kevin, it was also about having proof, a kind of insurance in case something ever happened again. He told a few friends about the incident, describing how unsettling it was to be followed for so long with no clear reason. Some of them shared their own stories, and Kevin realized he wasn't alone. Incidents like his happened more often than most people realized. Sometimes it was road rage. Sometimes it was something more deliberate. But the end result was the same. A feeling of vulnerability that was hard to shake. Kevin learned to trust his instincts. If something felt off, he didn't ignore it. He kept his doors locked, stayed alert, and tried not to let his guard down, especially when the road was empty and the night was long. The experience stuck with him, a reminder that not every threat is obvious, and that sometimes the most dangerous situations are the ones that unfold quietly, without warning. Travelers expect danger in unfamiliar places, but sometimes the places we choose for safety can hold their own risks. For some, the search for rest brings them face to face with a different kind of threat, one that waits just beyond a motel room door, when exhaustion makes it harder to tell what's safe and what isn't. Lisa Monroe's hands were tight on the steering wheel as she watched the road signs blur by. She'd been on US 101 for hours, the sky outside her windshield black and empty, except for the steady line of the highway. She felt the fatigue in her jaw and behind her eyes, and the idea of pulling over to sleep in her car made her uneasy. The road felt too empty, too far from help. When she finally saw the small neon sign for a motel at exit 17, just north of a dark stretch of pines, she told herself it was better than nothing. The sign buzzed vacancy in flickering red. The building sat low to the ground, a single story with maybe a dozen doors lined up in a row. She pulled in, scanning the lot. There were only 2 other vehicles, a battered pickup parked near the end of the row and a white van angled close to one of the middle rooms. She parked as close to her assigned room as she could. The lot was dim except for a single bulb near the office and the neon sign. She could see room 7's light still on, the rest in darkness. The office was stuffy, the carpet worn thin in places, and a stack of faded brochures sat next to a dusty glass case of snacks. The man behind the counter slid a key across without looking up. "Room 5, he said. She paid in cash, then walked back out with the key in her hand, feeling the chill in the air and the way the quiet pressed in around her. Inside, room 5 was spare. There was a bed with a thin blanket, a wooden chair, and a single lamp overhead that flickered every few seconds. There was no deadbolt on the door, just a standard lock. She hesitated, then closed the door and clicked the lock into place. The room felt cold and too quiet. She dropped her bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. Her phone showed no bars. She tried the Wi-Fi password, but nothing loaded. She thought about the isolation, the parking lot outside, the dark highway, the way the office manager barely looked at her. She stood and pulled the blinds closed. Through the slats, she noticed the white van again. It was parked closer than she remembered, almost directly across from her window, its front angled so it faced her door. She hadn't seen anyone get out, and the windows were dark. She let the blinds fall and tried to ignore it. She told herself that people drove vans all the time. It didn't mean anything. The exhaustion made her limbs heavy, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. She lay on the bed, listening for any sound from outside. The motel was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the distant hiss of the highway. She closed her eyes, then opened them again when she thought she heard something. A faint crunch on the gravel outside. She sat up, listening. The footsteps came and went, slow and uneven. She heard them pause by her door, then move away. Her heart beat faster. She waited, holding her breath. A few minutes later, she heard the footsteps again, closer this time. There was a soft rattle at her doorknob, the sound of metal against metal, as if someone was testing the lock. She froze, staring at the door, every muscle tense. The sound stopped, replaced by a faint click from the direction of the van. She imagined someone moving between her door and the vehicle, hidden by the thin curtains and the dark outside. The urge to leave grew stronger. She grabbed her bag, slipped her shoes on, and checked the window once more. The van was still there, engine off, no lights on. She couldn't see anyone outside, but the sense of being watched was sharp. She moved quickly, unlocking her door as quietly as she could. She stepped outside, keys in hand, and walked straight to her car. She didn't look back until she was inside with the doors locked. As she started the engine, her headlights swept across the lot. For a second, she saw a man standing near the van, facing her, not moving. He didn't wave or call out. He just watched. She reversed out of the lot, her tires crunching over the gravel. The man didn't follow. The van stayed where it was, crooked and silent. She turned onto the highway, her hands shaking on the wheel. She didn't slow down for several miles, not until she saw the lights of a larger town ahead. Later, Lisa read about motels like the one at Exit 17, how their isolation and lack of security made them easy targets for crime. Experts advised travelers to avoid small, remote motels when possible, and to choose chain hotels with visible security cameras, good lighting, and sturdy locks. They also recommended sharing your travel plans with someone and staying in contact, so help isn't far away if something goes wrong. Lisa started following that advice. She made a point to check for cameras in parking lots. and only booked places with well-lit entrances. If she couldn't get a signal on her phone, she kept driving. She never found out what would have happened if she'd stayed. The memory of the footsteps, the rattling doorknob, and the van parked just outside her window stayed with her. She learned to trust the feeling that said something was off. It wasn't just the lack of sleep or the strange location. It was the sense that someone was waiting for her to let her guard down, even for a moment. Lisa's story isn't about a dramatic escape or a confrontation. It's about how quickly a safe place can turn unsettling, how a simple decision, where to stop for the night, can carry risks you don't see until it's too late. She started telling friends to pay attention to the details, the number of cars in the lot, the lighting, whether the office staff seemed alert. She told them not to ignore their instincts, even if it felt like overreacting. The next time she drove through Northern California, she didn't even look at the sign for exit 17. She kept her eyes on the road and her phone charged, choosing her stops more carefully. The lesson stayed with her. Sometimes, the ordinary places hold the most unexpected threats. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is listen to the warning in your gut and move on before the situation turns. There's a reason these stories linger. They show how easily the routine can shift, how a single moment of uncertainty can change everything. Decoy stranded motorists, dense fog used as cover, silent cars that follow for miles, and strangers who test locks in the night. These are the tactics that turned routine drives into something far more dangerous. Each story offered a look at how quickly things can shift, and how threats often come from the least expected places. If you've picked up your own habits for staying safe, or if you've experienced something similar on the road, share your tips or stories in the comments below. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, act on it immediately. Because sometimes the scariest thing on the highway isn't the road, it's what's waiting in the dark.